Hello, Allyson. So excited to be with you on this first installment of the Ask Allyson podcast. You've been an inspiration and source of wisdom on art and life for so many people throughout the years on your blog and in your Ask Allyson corner during full moon ceremonies.
Oh, yeah.
So one question that many have had, perhaps after being inspired after attending a full moon gathering or an art church, is how do you start an art practice? What is your advice for people who want to get started on their artistic journey?
Some of us, had a practice at one time. Some of us, or most of us, all of us were artists when we were in nursery school, right? And then when we got to kindergarten, some of us broke off, and it was kind of like some of us were artists and some of us weren't. But some of us still identify as artists today. And some of us feel, that we're not doing what we're meant to be doing. If we have an identity as an artist, but we're not making art, how can we get started on that? But then there are others of us that had an art practice, that even went to art school, maybe. Were thought of as the artist of their class in high school or whatever, and they were always, but they've let it go. They've let it go. So they want to jumpstart it. And some of us have never been artists. But we see people that are, and we think they're very happy with it, and it makes them very peaceful. It's a really nice activity that lasts way into your life, that you can continue. So they want to start an art practice too, and so I try to, and then I was going to mention the category of person that may have an artist block. Mm-hmm. We get a lot of questions about people with an artist block. How do you get out of an artist block? And it's the same sort of thing. I'll start there. And that is, it takes really a few things to have an art practice because it exists in the material world. It takes materials, but it first takes time. Time in the material world is linear. You have to pick a time to do your art. What would be the best time to do your art? Would it be like early in the morning when the kids are just not even up yet or whatever, the husband gets up later? Is it at night when everybody's, when you pack it in, you can, get comfortable and do it? Or is it all during the day? Maybe you have more time, a few hours in the day. Anyway, you have to pick a time because if you don't, you will just probably let it go. Like a yoga practice. I always remind people, if you have a yoga practice and you say, I'll do it sometime, but, I don't know when, and you don't make up your mind about it, then you won't do it. So you have to have a time. So you carve out a time, then you need space, time and space. So you have to have space. And I recommend picking a place you love to go. If it's in the corner of your bedroom next to a window, if it's in the corner of your dining room where your kids do their homework, somewhere you want to be. If you want to be in front of a television, if you want to have music nearby, make it a comfortable zone. It doesn't have to be a lot of space, but you need to have a place that you can go and leave your stuff because you don't want to have to clean up and pack up the dining room table every time you do it because you're using it for other things. So it's your space. It's a corner of somewhere that is unused. I wouldn't recommend a basement or dank, windowless cave, unless you really love that sort of thing. No, it could be, but I think that yes, you just have to find a nice place that will attract you. So there's time, space, then there's the materials. Do you know what you want to make art with? So if you don't know what you want to make art with, that's the first thing you've got to figure out is like, well, you can go into an art store and see what calls you, what have you always wanted to do. You can look at other people's art and say, they use acrylic on canvas, so I want to, or I prefer this. You listen to other artists. I use wood. It's a wood panel with oil paint. That's my favorite way. But I also use acrylic with canvas because traveling, sometimes we did lots of live painting. You have to have it to go with you, and that's acrylic and separate set of brushes, all that. Then watercolor, my favorite. For years, I was a watercolorist. I treasure it. It's delicious. I recommend it. But you may like chalk. Pastels, call people. I would never use it. But yeah, everybody has to see what attracts you. You want to go to something that you love. Pencils may be the thing for a while, but if you start filling in huge amounts of space, you're going to need paint. So anyway, it's just, make it fun for yourself, not labor. Of course, labor intensive. I love it. Whatever calls you, you have to feel. Now, how do you? Well, Alex says that the fourth and really most important thing that you need to have an art practice is your subject, your content. What are you going to make art about? And if you're starting an art practice, or if you're jump starting an art practice that you once had, getting back into it, excuse me, I recommend self-portrait. Alex and I both recommend self-portrait. Most of our workshops include a self-portrait of some sort. And, self-portrait can be anything. Self-portrait can be collage. Self-portrait can be, assemblage inside of a suitcase. It can be a sculpture. It can be, anything. So, but self-portrait, if you really just want to figure it out, sit down, put a mirror up, and draw yourself. It takes very little to have a sketchbook and a pencil with you at any time. That's going to promote your art practice as well.
Now, on the subject of time,
yes.
A lot of people feel like, oh, I'm just too busy to have an art practice. Right. What would you say if someone is feeling that? What if it's only, is there a minimum amount of time needed for an art practice?
When I hear that is, you don't want to have an art practice. That's really what I hear. Because we do what we want to do, basically. And I mean, we all have time. The busiest people are the most, have the most time. So, we all have time for what we want. So you have to really look at if that's what you want, because there's other ways of being creative. Yes, I believe that creativity is a health factor. I think that if we don't be creative and allow the creative flow to go through us and out into the world as evidence, that could be performance, it could be music, it could be dance, it could be gardening. Gardening's evidence. Cooking, whatever it is, if you have creativity flowing through you, it's a health factor. It will help your health. If you don't, if you block it, if you say, I don't have time, I'm too busy typing on my computer and, doing things for other people and not really focusing on my creative life, your physical health could suffer from that because you're blocking the creative flow.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not allowing yourself to be the identity that you see yourself as being. So, so I do think that, yes, creativity, and it may not be art. And it may be like you want to play the flute, I mean, look at the flute. I'm serious. It's a very simple instrument. I picked up the piano at the age of 62 after a 50-year hiatus. So
any creative outlet, really. Could be parkour.
Parkour. Don't forget to do it, whether you do it professionally or not. I always say, you don't have to be Lance Armstrong to enjoy riding a bike. You can ride a bike for fun, and so can you make art for fun and for spiritual enrichment. Gives you such great joy.
Now, the second element you mentioned was space. Yes. And I noticed that you have an altar in your creative space. Is that something that you feel is important to have in the place where you're creating art?
Oh, altars are so important. We have an altar everywhere. We have altars all over in every room. You can't go into a room of our house that there isn't an altar. I think, in this sense, we've always had, it starts like we started one on Alex's bureau in our bedroom in Brooklyn, and it just like, it goes, and then it goes to another table, and then there's my personal one and his personal one. Anyway, I recommend altars. What are altars? What do you put on an altar? Power objects, objects of power. These are things that many times, things that people give to you, that are gifts of love and empowerment. People that give me gifts, for my altar are saying, they're voting. They're a stand, like you always say, for for all the things that I want in love. So I put them there to empower me. Sometimes you found objects.
Yeah.
I have 2 morels. I may have 3 actually.
Nice.
Morels on my altar because people have found them. I found 1. That's the one that I found last year.
Yeah, and it allows you to, orient your altar towards your creative goals, like perhaps a sigil. A sigil specific to something you want to create.
I have a sigil on my altar,
yeah.
But I also have a sigil on my treadmill. So you put sigils in places of power, places that you go to, but also places that you see often. That's the point of a sigil, is to try to remind you of the intention that is behind that sigil.
Why would you, if you would, recommend to someone to practice visual art? You mentioned playing the flute or other things like riding a bike, but what is something about visual art specifically that could be beneficial for someone to dive into?
Couple of things. One that came up right away was that it's something that we were good at when we were young. Many of us were good at one thing or another, either building, maybe some of us were better with blocks, but we were good at it when we were young. So it's, you can't say you were really good at music when you were young. You might have been a great singer though. I mean, I know little kids that start singing when they're very, very young, and it serves them throughout their life. So it's something that enriches you from the start, that you got strokes for right in the beginning. But sometimes art is a thing that you didn't get strokes for, and you got maybe slammed down, like that tree isn't supposed to be red. Trees aren't red, or whatever, and you just like felt and then you like went away from art, but you really always wanted to be inside, and it might be vocal, it might be drums, it might be music, but you have to know what you feel is really who you are, whatever anybody else said about you, or maybe it is stroke. So anyway, I think that's one of the reasons why visual art is really, really good. The other thing is something that Alex always talks about, which is the subjective and objective quality of art. There's this, inner angst that you might have. This is why art therapy works, because there's this inner angst or this inner something that you're dealing with, something you're putting up with, and you put it in an objective form. It's subjective inside of you, but then you have this object in front of you that represents it.
Yeah.
And you say, that's what it looks like. Yeah. And if it doesn't look like that the first time you try, keep trying. It's a great seed for your creative content. The most important thing. Make it about that. I think when Alex and I first met, both of our works were primarily about the self in our early 20s. And some people write work about the self throughout their life. I think all of us to some degree. But later on, our work became more universal, I think. But it's a very good place to go at any time in your life, to revisit the self. We're always doing self-portraits.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me of a quote by E.M. Forster where he says, "How am I supposed to know what I think until I can see what I say?" And he said that about writing, but it's so much so with kind of visual art too. When you can kind of take yourself and manifest yourself onto a canvas, you can take that third person perspective and kind of get a glimpse into yourself that you might not otherwise really be able to get.
And also, many of us creative people, have more than one horse to ride. We are creative in more than one way. Forster was a great writer, and and people who focus on writing can become better and better writers. Alex and I write though probably every day too, so we improve our writing. And Alex has many books, and I've worked with him on them. So we both are writers, and I think piano, music. Don't feel limited. Creativity is, stretches out wide. It's just, you have to expand to include.
Wow. Well, if anyone was inspired to start an art practice from this conversation, please share it on Instagram and tag Chapel of Sacred Mirrors. We'd love to see what you create.
And ask your questions and send me your questions to the Ask Allyson blog. I've been having this blog for, a dozen years or so. Many questions are posted there. It's been very sort of undercover. If you come to my website at AllysonGrey.com, you can go to the blog, or you can get it through CoSM.org. It's also posted there, so you can find out all the questions that people have asked in the past, and ask us an interesting question. If you ask an interesting question, we'll include your picture of your art, maybe, your URL if you like. So I'd love to see your art. We'll talk about it together. If it interests other people, it can benefit others.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Allyson, for exploring this subject with us today.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you.